So you've been studying for the FAA Part 107 exam, and you pretty much know what to expect in regard to the questions, right? But what about the questions that you don't expect? In this video, I'm going to give you 20 of the most unexpected questions on the Part 107 exam, and we'll be going over all of the details, all of the explanations, so that way you'll know what to expect when it's time to take this test. So put your thinking caps on, pencils and papers out. Are you ready? Let's go. Now, before we begin with the first question, I want you to know that I didn't just pull these questions out of a hat. All of these questions were accumulative from all of the people who have taken the Part 107 exam and passed. This is what's going to give you the edge, because instead of just scoring an 80, 85, 90, you'll be able to push further and get you closer to the 100% pass. So let's jump into the first unexpected question, and what you need to do is to basically look at the question, answer the question, then I'm going to explain it. And after I explain it, I'm going to go back to the question again, and you will have an opportunity to determine if your initial answer was either right or wrong. So first question, night operations. And thank you, John, for sending this question. And just so you all know, you can message me through my study guide website at MikeSytes.com. So now let's pull up unexpected question number 1. You are flying at night and observe an airplane flying at low altitude in your area. How can you determine if the aircraft is getting closer or moving further away? And notice that I'm also giving you the FAA regulation 14 CFR 107.29. Now let's go over this in detail. What is it in the question that you're seeing that stands out as something that would be important when you're trying to consider visibility? And the words that stand out the most are flying at night. So therefore, if you're observing an airplane flying at night, what is it actually that's visible? Well, of course, the lights. And you already know, and I already know, that according to FAA rules and regulations, that when you're flying at night, that you must have anti-collision lights that are visible up to 3 statute miles. So keep those thoughts in your head and now go back and finish the question. How can you determine if the aircraft is getting closer or moving further away? And you can see that as we're breaking this down, that the question is becoming much easier to answer because there's only one reference that we're working with, and those are the lights on the aircraft, because that's the only thing that we can see at night. And you notice that I have not shown you the multiple choice answers yet, because I want you to think first before you answer the question of which you already know the answer to. Heed these profound thoughts. You shouldn't be looking for the answer. You should only be looking for confirmation of the answer of which you already know. So here is the explanation. If an aircraft is approaching you at night, its lights will appear to become brighter as it gets closer to you over time. And conversely, as it moves away from you, the lights become more dim. This is what the FAA teaches you that is called closure rate. I want you to remember those two words, closure rate, and look for that on the Part 107 exam. That closure rate at night is determined by the light intensity. Now, there is one more thing that I have to discuss that may or may not be on the Part 107 exam, and that is the visual limitations of the human eye. And this aspect alone would render the judgment of distance in regard to the human factor as being inaccurate. So now that you know the details about this unexpected question, let's see if you can answer this question correctly with a certain amount of expectation. A, the aircraft will appear to be descending as it moves closer. B, the lights on the aircraft will increase or decrease with intensity. Or C, the aircraft's lights will appear to change colors. And what's so cool about this video is that there's nothing unexpected about this question, because I already know that you know the correct answer. Let's move to number 2. And this question has to do with what the FAA terms as right of way. Question is, why would it be unsafe to operate a small unmanned aircraft in the vicinity of hot air balloons? And notice that I'm also pointing to the statute 14 CFR 107.37. Now let's talk about the details for a moment so you'll be able to answer the question without actually seeing what the answers are. This code of federal regulation specifies that a remote pilot operating an SUAS must yield the right-of-way to other manned aircraft. Now, for those of you who don't know, the FAA has defined a hot air balloon as a manned aircraft. But the way that they're asking this question throws you off unexpectedly, so you don't really know what it is that they're actually referring to. What we're familiar with is that whenever we see a hot air balloon, that we yield to the right-of-way, but we've never discussed why it would be unsafe to operate a small SUAS in the vicinity of a hot air balloon. But what I'm going to do is put a comparison together for you. Think of a hot air balloon as a giant jellyfish with tentacles hanging from the bottom. And of course, we all know that hot air balloons don't normally fly with cables dangling from the bottom as if they were tethered, but the FAA doesn't see it that way. And just as I've mentioned in my previous videos, they assume that you should already know that it is unsafe to operate a small unmanned aircraft in the vicinity of a hot air balloon just because of that factor. They're testing you literally to see if whether or not you understand that hot air balloons may be tethered during launch, landing, or ground handling. And they're assuming that you should already know that those tethered lines can be extremely difficult to see when the hot air balloon is in the air. This is why this question is so unexpected. And I've already put the answers on screen. And do you see how both A and B seem most likely to be the correct answer? A seems to be so dangerous because of the unpredictability due to wind. B is the Coriolis effect or force, which is unexpected because you probably don't even know what that means, which is caused by the Earth's rotation. And C is made out to seem as though it's not even something that's unsafe at all. But at this point, you're expected to know what the correct answer is. On the FAA Part 107 exam, the only correct answer is C. And keep this in mind, if there is something in one of the answers that is out of context, such as a scientific term, then it is almost always something that the FAA threw in there as a distractor. Number 3, remote pilot transfer. Now, what is that? Completely unexpected, right? Here's the question. 2 certified remote pilots want to transfer control of a small UA during active flight. How may this be accomplished? Again, before I post the multiple choice answers, I want you to think. So let's go directly to the FAA Advisory Circular AC 107-2A. And you'll be able to find this on my website, MikeSytes.com, under Supplements. Now you see that I've jumped right to Chapter 5, Part 107, Subpart B for Operating Rules of a Small UAS. Let's go over this subsection so that way we'll know exactly how to answer the question before I show you the answers. Part 107 permits transfer of control of a small UAS between certified remote pilots. Now notice the next line says 2 or more certified remote pilots transferring operational control. And it may be done only if both are capable of maintaining visual line of sight of the small unmanned aircraft without loss of control. And at some point, the takeover can be facilitated simply by communicating the transfer of that control. So now that you have all of that in mind, let me put the answers on screen as I just did. Do you see immediately how if you scan that A, B, and C, all of them pretty much make sense, right? But if you do what I taught you to do, you should already know the answer, and that one should be only for confirmation. Let's go to the answer that is not unexpected. And of course, the correct answer is A, because there can only be one remote pilot that maintains control and authorization at all times during the transfer. If we look at answer B, it mentions sharing the control responsibility, and we know that was not in the advisory circular. And if we look at answer C, it mentions landing the aircraft safely before transferring control. And you already know, based on the question, that you can transfer control during an active flight. So now that you know what to expect on that one, let's move to number 4. And this is all about false reporting from a remote pilot. And the question is, if a remote PIC intentionally falsifies a required report, the FAA may do what? And again, I'm not putting the answers on screen because I want you to develop an understanding prior to answering those questions. So let's discuss 14 CFR Part 107.5, falsification, reproduction, or alteration of a report. Now, just briefly here, it says any fraudulent or intentional false record or report that is required to be following, and there wasn't much information here at the Code of Federal Regulations, so I needed to go to the FAR and look it up. Falsification, reproduction, and alteration. Here it says no person may make or cause to be made, and if I sum up everything that is below that, basically what it says is if you make a false report, then there will be a denial of the application for a remote pilot certificate or a certificate of waiver. There can be a denial of a declaration of compliance, suspension or revocation of any certificate, waiver, or declaration of compliance issued or accepted by the administrator, and there can even be civil penalties. So the best thing to do is don't write a false report. Now, you already know what it is that we just discussed, so looking at the answers, you should already be confirming what it is that you already know. And you see, B is the correct answer because A and C were never mentioned in any of the regulations that we just went over. Now let's take this a step further and let's go over the question again. Look at the question and tell me, what is the key word that you see in the question? Is it falsified? Is it the word required? No, it's the word intentionally. And why is this word intentionally so important? That's because the FAA treats intent completely different than they do a mistake. That single word determines whether the FAA will respond with education and correction or enforcement and punishment. And it's also the single word that you should be looking for on the Part 107 exam so that you can answer the question correctly. Now let's talk about another unexpected question that has to do with visual perception. So here's the question. While flying forward, nearby trees appear to move quickly while distant mountains move slowly. This is an example of... Now, some of you already know the answer to this question because you've been going over the test questions that I've been posting on this channel. But for those of you who do not know the answer, then understanding this concept is the key to getting this question right on the Part 107 exam. Basically, just looking at the word parallax, which by definition is a visual perception effect in which closer objects appear to move faster than the distant objects in relative position as you are moving. And by saying that, you can see that the only correct answer will be A, motion parallax. Often when you're taking the exam, you'll find that certain words are relatable to other words, and it's going to allow you to determine what the correct answer should be. Moving on to question 6, RPIC perception. And the reason that this is so unexpected is because 90% of you probably will not even know what this means. Now, as I read the question, point out the key words. A remote PIC correctly identifies all hazards in the operating environment and understands how these hazards could affect the flight outcome. Now pause the video just for a moment and select the keywords. What keywords did you choose? Well, I hope they're the keywords that I'm pointing to right now because that's going to clue you to the answer. Identifies all hazards and understands the outcome. If you only had those 4 words, you would get this answer correct 100% of the time. And for the 3 multiple choice answers, A, risk management, B, aeronautical decision making, and C, situational awareness, there is only one that suits those 4 words, and it is C, situational awareness. And the reason that you expect C to be the correct answer is because situational awareness is the ability to perceive hazards, to comprehend the significance and anticipate their impact on the operation. It's almost like having eyes in the back of your head. You can see it coming before you even turn around. This type of discerning ability is what you need to develop as a remote pilot in command. And again, whenever you're reading the questions, point out the key words in the questions to help you determine the correct answer. Number 7, transponder modes. And in case you don't know what a transponder is, it's basically a piece of equipment that allows you to receive and transmit radio signals. Now, as you already know, with a drone and a remote controller, they are both able to receive and transmit signals. So with that, let's read the question. A remote pilot plans to operate a small unmanned aircraft system, SUAS, within Class B airspace. Which of the following is required for the operation? Now, I have already brainwashed you just as the FAA would, giving you information to throw you off. And you know what the information was that I gave you? It was to tell you that a drone and a remote controller both transmit and receive signals. That was a distractor that I gave you, and the FAA will do that also because they want to make sure that you know the information. Listen, the only difference between me and the FAA, and everybody else for that matter, is that they won't explain this in detail. And if you skim through the answers, you can already see that they're throwing you distractors because they're talking about ADS-B, Mode C transponder, all of this equipment that you need. And the fact of the matter is simply that a drone is not allowed to have a transponder and does not transmit on Mode C or ADS-B. It is not permitted. Or if you look at the clue that I gave you just above the question for 14 CFR 107.52, which has ATC transponder equipment prohibition. Prohibition means that it is not allowed. You can't use it. And if you went even further and looked at 14 CFR 107.53, that will tell you that ADS-B out is not allowed on a drone. The equipment that they're referring to is only suitable and available and usable on manned aircrafts, not unmanned aircrafts. So the only correct answer here is the one that does not mention anything about Mode C or ADS-B, and that is B. RPIC must obtain ATC authorization before operating in Class B airspace. And you can see how this unexpected question could have forced you to answer the question incorrectly as the FAA expected you to do. Number 8, let's talk about lithium batteries. Now, a lot of you probably don't even know what a lithium battery is. So basically, in a nutshell, it's basically a rechargeable battery that gives you a very high output power, such as what you would use on a drone. The convenience here is that you can use this high power source in a very small compact battery size. It's kind of like taking a pit bull and stuffing it into a shoebox. The problem here is that the same features that make these lithium batteries so powerful also makes them extremely hazardous. So the FAA wants to make sure that you know exactly what to do when these unexpected situations occur. Now let's look at the question. A remote pilot plans to operate a small unmanned aircraft. What precautions should a remote pilot or a remote PIC take to reduce the risk of flight emergencies when they're using lithium-based batteries? Now, let's be honest. If I didn't just explain the pertinent information about lithium batteries, would you feel confident in answering the question correctly? Well, yes and no, because even if I give you the answers as I'm about to do, you still won't understand it, and I'll have to explain the answers to you also. So this is what we're going to do. Let's post the answers on screen and go over them right now. And remember, this is about the precautions that a remote PIC needs to take to reduce risk. A, to store the batteries fully discharged. Now, here's where you need to put your thinking caps on. Whenever it is that you buy a new drone or you have your old drone stored somewhere for a while and you open up the case, you'll see that the battery is either half full or half empty, depending on which perspective you're looking at, right? But it's always half full or half empty. It's never fully discharged, and there's a reason for that. It's because drones have intelligent, smart lithium polymer batteries, and they're programmed to automatically discharge to a safe storage level, usually around 40 to 60%, and they will remain at that level for safety until you're ready to use them. The fact is that if you use your batteries and you store them somewhere completely discharged, that you will damage the battery and they will be prone for failure much faster. Let's see what B has to offer. Use batteries that show signs of swelling. Well, I guess the bigger the battery, the better, right? No, not in this regard. If you notice your drone battery, or any battery for this matter, is swollen, that's an indication that internal chemical damage has already occurred. And why is this so important? It's because if you unexpectedly use that swollen battery, it's more than likely going to fail in mid-flight, and you wouldn't want to just crash and burn, right? And C would be to follow the manufacturer's charging and temperature guidelines. Now, don't you think that that would be a safe bet in regard to the FAA's recommendations, so that way the umbrella of liability is not hanging over their heads? Notice that I have inserted some notes just above the questions 1 and 2. FAA guidance and safety practice. This is not a federal regulation rule. See that? And number 2 is 14 CFR 107.49 for records and maintenance. No liability here because they're not telling you how to reduce risk. This is only about improper battery handling. So now that you have all of the details about this question, you now know what to expect. Okay, for number 9, recreational flyers and their limits. Let's clear up this unexpected misconception. Here is the question. A recreational drone pilot is flying in Class G airspace near a 600-foot radio tower. Under which condition, if any, may the pilot legally fly above 400 feet AGL? Now, notice that I'm not giving you the answers on the onset because I want you to be able to develop an understanding first before you make an attempt to answer these questions. You see, recreational drone operations in the United States are governed by 14 U.S.C. 44809. Now, as I'm saying this to you, what is it that stands out separate and apart from this 49 United States Code 44809? What stands out? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking that this code doesn't have anything to do with Part 107. It's for recreational flyers, and Part 107 is when you want to become certified as a remote pilot. So if this is a different code specifically set for recreational flyers, then you must assume that the rules and the regulations will not be the same. You all know this. You've watched my other videos that tell you that you can fly over 400 feet if you are within 400 feet of any structure. That is only for Part 107, but this is not Part 107 for recreational flyers. Recreational flyers are under this United States Code 44809. And according to this statute, there is a limitation that recreational flyers flying in Class G airspace cannot go any higher than 400 feet AGL. Now, I already know I'm going to get some bounce back in the comments from this particular question and what I just said, but think about this for a moment. What would be the purpose of passing a Part 107 exam so you could fly without restrictions if you could just be a recreational flyer and fly without restrictions anyway? That doesn't make any sense. So I'm here to make sense of it for you. So here it is. The statute that you're looking at on screen does not include the exception for allowing you to fly 400 feet over a structure. And now that you know that, here are the answers to the question. And since you've become so knowledgeable in regard to the explanation, your eyes should only be looking at one answer, and that is the answer that has the word never in it. Do you see how you just instinctively knew what that answer was because you were looking for confirmation and you weren't just trying to guess at any answer? A recreational flyer is not allowed to exceed the limit of 400 feet AGL. Done and done. Let's move to the next question. Number 10, ADM external pressure. Now, what could be so unexpected about this question? Here it is. Which situation best represents an external pressure affecting decision making? Well, let's break this down. You are a remote pilot and you make decisions. So it's aeronautical decision making, or ADM. Do you see how we just took a few words in the question decision making and determined that this has something to do with the pilot? This is why I'm presenting this to you in this way, because I want you to be one step ahead of the game. Decision making has something to do with the pilot. So look at the answers and tell me which one of those 3 answers has something to do with the pilot. It's not A, poor weather conditions. The pilot doesn't have anything to do with that. Or C, equipment malfunction. That's not part of decision making. But B has a word in the answer that tells you that this has to do with the pilot making a decision, and that word is desire. Do you see how this is all about a philosophical understanding? In the question, it's pointing to external pressure affecting decision making, and the desire to complete a paid flight on time is part of that external pressure. We're talking about financial incentives. We're talking about client expectations, a schedule that meets demands. All of these things add external pressure to a remote pilot, and this is what the FAA is hoping that you will be able to understand. And this is what I'm giving you, the understanding, so that way when you see this unexpected question on the exam, you'll know exactly how to answer it. Let's move to number 11. Now, I received this question today about drone registration. Let's say you were flying a drone recreationally, but you also registered it with the FAA. Now you want to fly that drone that's already registered commercially. Do you have to do a re-registration? Do you have to register it again? Let's read the question. A remote pilot obtained a remote pilot certificate after previously registering a small unmanned aircraft for recreational use. The pilot now plans to conduct a paid aerial photography flight with the same aircraft. What action is required before conducting the flight? Now, this is going to fall under 14 CFR 48.100. This is the FAA drone registration requirements. So let's talk about this just for a second. If you originally registered a drone under recreational use, then it does not allow you to fly that drone commercially, even if you have a Part 107 certificate. You'll need to go to faa.dronezone.com and cancel the recreational registration, and that's because the recreational registration number that you were given cannot be used for Part 107 operations. The aircraft must be registered at FAA Drone Zone under Part 107 as a commercial registration, so you'll need to pay them $5 again to register that drone appropriately. Now, if you've been looking at the answers while I've been explaining that, you already know that the correct answer is B. The aircraft must be re-registered under Part 107 before it can be used for commercial operations. Okay, let's move on to number 12. This is about aircraft specifics, completely unexpected question. And the question is, to ensure that the unmanned aircraft center of gravity CG limits are not exceeded, follow the aircraft loading instructions specified in which document? And you can see I'm displaying the answers on screen, because if you don't know the answer to this question, then you're basically taking a shot in the dark. So I'm going to explain this to you right now. This is a very confusing question, and the answers are also confusing, because if you look at, for example, A, Pilot's Operating Handbook, or POH, that is only for manned aircrafts. And you also see in the answer that it says or UAS flight manual. Well, that one is specifically for drones. So the confusion here is that the question is pointing to unmanned aircraft's center of gravity. It doesn't say anything about a manned aircraft. So you would automatically think that A would be incorrect, but that's not the way the FAA expects you to look at it. The Pilot's Handbook, POH, or UAS flight manual will provide you with one specific type of information, and that is the manufacturer's approved weight, balance, and center of gravity limitations specific to that particular aircraft. And it's available directly from the aircraft manufacturer, and it is physically carried on board the aircraft. Now, the other two answers, B and C, for those type of manuals or handbooks, do not have any information specific to loading data or center of gravity. So you know the correct answer here, A. Now let's talk about foreign drones, something that's not covered too often, am I right? And before I post the answers to the question that you're seeing on screen, let's go into detail and discuss all of the applications in regard to a foreign drone in the United States. Now let me show you how I go into detail by asking this one simple question which you may or may not know. What exactly is a foreign drone by definition? And I know some of you are answering that question by saying, well, it's a drone that's made outside of the United States, such as DJI, Autel, or even quote-unquote Skydio parts. Well, let's not go there. Or it could be a drone that's automatically illegal to fly in the United States. That could be one, right? Or it could be a drone that's based out of another country. But none of those would be an FAA definition. And the definition of a foreign drone is a drone that has been registered in a country that is other than the United States. So let me say that another way. A drone that has not been registered in the United States but is registered in another country. That is a foreign drone. Now listen, it's very important that you understand this. If a foreign operator, meaning a non-US citizen or non-resident, wants to operate a drone in the United States, they can do so as long as they register the drone at FAA Drone Zone under 14 CFR Part 48, which is for recreational flyers. Now here's the thing. Some drones are already registered outside of the United States, and you do not need to re-register that drone with the FAA. That will be something completely different if the drone is already registered outside of the United States abroad. So what has to happen in this scenario is that an NOI would need to be completed. An NOI is called a Notice of Identification, and the FAA will allow you to fly a drone that's already registered abroad outside of the United States, but you must complete the NOI in order to do so. Now, the reason that the Notice of Information, the NOI, is so important is because it allows the FAA to be provided with the information about the drone's identity and also gives information about the home registration and the origin of the drone, as well as the remote ID details and information. So let's take a look at this unexpected question. A non-US citizen is visiting the United States and plans to conduct a commercial drone operation using a drone that is registered with the FAA. Which statement is correct? A. The operation is permitted if the drone is FAA registered and the operator holds an FAA Part 107 remote pilot certificate. B. The operation is prohibited because only U.S. citizens may operate FAA-registered drones. Or C. The operation is permitted only if the drone was manufactured in the United States. Now, I've already gone over the definition of a foreign drone, but this question is focused on a non-U.S. citizen. Now, this is very important. Always keep this in your head. The FAA does not restrict drone operations based on citizenship. Anyone can fly. Even a foreign operator may legally operate an FAA-registered small unmanned aircraft within the United States airspace. And remember what we just went over. They either have to have an NOI or they'll need to register the drone with the FAA Drone Zone. But pay attention to the question. The question is saying commercial drone operations, so therefore something else is required. And that is exactly why you're on this channel right now watching this video, because if you plan to fly commercially, you're going to need an FAA Part 107 remote pilot certificate also. So the only correct answer on these choices would be A. The operation is permitted if the drone is FAA registered and the remote pilot holds an FAA Part 107 remote pilot certificate. Question number 14, altimeter settings. Unexpected question here also. Let's read the question. When an altimeter setting is adjusted to 29.92 inches of mercury, what altitude is being displayed? And I know a lot of you just probably went numb because you have absolutely no idea of what they're talking about. So let's talk about it. And I'm leaving the answers up on screen so that way you can be even more confused. But I'm going to resolve this circumstance right now. If you go to my website at MikeSytes.com under Weather Conditions Study Guide, it will provide you with detailed information in regard to this topic relating to standard pressure 29.92 inches of mercury. Remember that number. 29.92. Also remember the standard sea level temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. And I've put a lot of questions on this website so you'll be able to develop a better understanding between the videos and what it is that you're reading. Now, going back to the question, look at the answers to see if there's anything at all that stands out. I can see it. They all have the word altitude in it. Am I right? Yeah. And who was it that said that the more words you have in an answer, the more likely that's going to be the one that's correct? Well, that's not always true. When we're talking about altimeter settings, we're talking about pilots who are in an airplane adjusting and calibrating their equipment and their gauges to 29.92 inches of mercury at sea level. And if you look at answer A, altimeter settings are not referenced at ground level, so you might as well throw answer A out. Now, by process of elimination, you can see answer B and C remain, but there can only be one correct answer. So let's play a little game. Instead of thinking about flying in the air, let's think about water, because they're both relatively the same thing. When you're underwater near the surface, then there's less water around you. That means there's less pressure. And when you dive deeper, there's more water stacked around you, so you feel more pressure. It's exactly the same thing when you're in the air. When you're at a higher altitude, there's less air around you, so there's less pressure. And when you're at a lower altitude, there's more air around you, so there's more pressure. But here's the golden key that I'm giving you. When you introduce temperature into the equation, pressure altitude does not change, but density altitude does change. I just gave you the golden key because now you know that when pilots are flying their airplanes in the air, they can rely on pressure altitude because regardless of what the temperature is outside, the pressure altitude will always remain reliably consistent. It cannot be density altitude because density altitude will change according to temperature changes. And here's the breakdown one more time. Pressure altitude depends only on pressure. Density altitude depends on pressure and temperature. I will go more in depth on this topic on another video. Let's move to 15. The unexpected question in regard to communication. Now, this is something that the FAA likes to put on the exam, so let's read the question. During a complex drone operation, a visual observer notices another aircraft approaching the operation area, but hesitates to inform the remote pilot because they assume the PIC already sees it. This situation best illustrates a breakdown in, now let's look at the answers. It says A, situational awareness, B, crew resource management, C, aeronautical decision making. Now you see I've put all three answers on screen because regardless of whether I left them on or off, it's still going to be difficult for you to know what the correct answer is unless I explain it to you. So first thing, let me ask you, who's responsible in this situation? Well, anytime that you hear the word responsible or responsibility, the correct answer will always be the remote pilot in command. But in this situation, it's something that happened with the visual observer. So use your common sense. Who is the visual observer? Well, the visual observer is a crew member that is a part of the organization that is running this operation with the remote pilot in command. So obviously that leads you to the next question, which is who's actually managing this crew? That is the remote pilot in command that's managing. So I just gave you a two-part solution because if you look at answer B, it mentions the crew, it mentions resource, and it mentions management. So the correct answer can only be crew resource management, but that still doesn't give you a clear understanding of what CRM actually is. Crew resource management, or CRM, is the effective use of all resources, including people, equipment, information. It utilizes all resources to ensure safe flight in any given scenario. In this situation, the visual observer failed to communicate critical information to the remote pilot in command. That is a part of crew resource management. It emphasizes clear communication. It emphasizes assertiveness, teamwork. All of this has to do with CRM. So when you see these type of topics, these type of questions on the exam, you automatically know this has to do with crew resource management, CRM. Let's move to the next question. Number 16, visual methods. And this has to do with the remote pilot using his or her eyes to scan the sky to detect other oncoming aircraft. And I think I've already read the question to you, but it's basically asking what scanning methods are used whenever it is that you're trying to effectively detect other aircraft and avoid collisions. So let's talk about the theory very quickly, because when you understand the principle behind this, you won't have to think about the answer. You just automatically know what it is. You see, the human eyes are not very good at detecting slow-moving objects in the distance whenever our eyes are fixed at one specific location. What I mean is, if you're staring at one place only, one specific point, then your eyes are not as sensitive to detect movement in the distance as if you were moving your eyes periodically from side to side or deliberately in steps. The reason this question is so unexpected but so popular with the FAA is because the FAA teaches you that effective visual scanning requires systematic eye movement, not staring, and definitely not using your peripheral vision. So just by me giving you that theoretical bit of information, that knowledge, You already know the answer. You don't even have to think about it because the correct answer is B. Use a series of short, regular spaced eye movements to scan small sections of the sky. For all of you who got that wrong on the Part 107 exam, that's the answer the FAA was looking for. Number 17, remote pilot stress. Now let's go ahead and read the question on this one. As a remote pilot, long extended flights during hot summer temperatures increase the susceptibility of dehydration since the... Now before we go over the answers, let me give you some friendly advice about the question. You see, whenever the FAA starts using words of a higher vocabulary, then that means they're trying to make you think that the question's difficult. But the question isn't difficult at all if you take out those unnecessary words. So I'm going to do that right now. Watch this. Here's the same question. Long extended flights during hot summers increase dehydration since the... It's the same question. So now I can go to the answer, but let's put the original question back on the screen since you already know how to do this. And now that you're looking at the answers, it's very easy to find out which one is the correct one because A says hot days will increase the rate of water loss in the body. Answer A is referring to dehydration, and B and C don't have anything to do with that. So the correct answer here is A. Next question, 18. Airspace authorization, something that may be a rare question on the Part 107 exam. Here's the question. A remote pilot receives LANC authorization for controlled airspace but launches 15 minutes earlier than the approved start time due to favorable weather. And the question is asking which one of the following answer choices would be correct. Now let's talk about this just for a moment. If you have ever received a LANC authorization for flying in controlled airspace, then you know the answer to this question. But if you have not, then you may not know the answer. LANC authorizations are time specific. If you're operating outside of that approved window, then even if you're flying early, it will be considered as an unauthorized flight in controlled airspace, and that is under 14 CFR Part 107.41. And just because you have a severe weather condition that's approaching, that doesn't give you the authorization to override LANC authorization. So now let's go over the answers. A. Authorization remains valid as long as the altitude limits are followed. B. Authorization is unauthorized during the unapproved time window. And C. Early operations are allowed if ATC is not actively monitoring. So do you see what's happening here? I'm giving you the detailed explanations and you're looking at the answers. You know what the answer is already. And at this point, the only thing that you're looking for is confirmation of what you already know. And for the sake of just saying it, the correct answer here is B. Number 19, emergency procedures. Now, this may be an unexpected question simply because you didn't remember that we went over this in the first series. So let's read the question. During a Part 107 operation, the RPIC deviates from regulation to avoid an unexpected manned helicopter that enters into the operating area. Now, you see it's asking, what must a remote pilot in command do after the flight? Let me give you a quick and easy way to remember this. If you're driving your car on a 2-lane road and you see someone is coming at you in your lane and you deviate or change lanes to get around it and there's no accident and the car just passes you by, do you call the insurance company? I think I just answered the question for you, but let's look at the question again. What must the remote pilot in command do after the flight? A. Nothing, because emergency authority permanently resolves the situation. B. Submit a written report to the FAA only if requested. And C. Immediately notify air traffic control after landing. Now, going back to the road situation, if that insurance company calls you and says that, hey, we need a report from that near miss you had on the road, then you've got to give them a report. It's the same thing as answer B. You submit a report only if the FAA is requesting a report. And as you were expecting, last but not least, number 20, drone automation. Now, here's the question. A remote pilot launches a Part 107 operation using a manufacturer-provided automated flight mode. The aircraft independently adjusts altitude to maintain tracking accuracy and briefly exceeds the authorized altitude without pilot input or warning. Who is responsible? Now, this is a very good question because normally it would be the remote pilot in command, right? But I want you to look at the question. It says automated flight mode, and this is from an independent manufacturer. So what do you think the correct answer should be in this situation? You see, it falls under 14 CFR 107.49. So post a comment now for your answer, A, B, or C. Should it be the aircraft manufacturer's fault? Should it be the remote pilot in command's fault? Or should it be that no one holds responsibility for this? And you can see how unexpected this question is, because after all of this, you should already know that anytime you see the word responsibility in a question, that it will always be the remote pilot in command. And that's all I've got to say. I'm all talked out. Hey, listen, I've got another video coming for you next week. Stay tuned to this channel. Until then, I will see you all on the next video.